When Cathy married into one of California's most powerful real estate families, she thought love would be enough. But what began as a fairy tale quickly turned into a carefully staged performance, complete with a prenuptial agreement designed to leave her with nothing. They underestimated her. They thought she was just another outsider looking in. But when Cathy unexpectedly inherited $22 million, everything changed. And so did she. What followed wasn't just a divorce. It was a quiet storm, planned with grace and executed with precision. She didn't scream, she didn't beg. She simply smiled and started planning her exit. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps give light to voices that deserve to be seen and heard. Cathy always believed love could bridge any gap. Status, background, even cold glares across a lavish dining table. But the day Nicholas' parents handed her a prenuptial agreement over seared salmon and vintage wine, something inside her quietly cracked. "This is Nicholas' home. You'll leave with what you came with," Tracy announced with a brittle smile, her manicured fingers tapping the manila folder. It was a performance, really, one rehearsed, smooth, and dripping with superiority. Cathy glanced at Nicholas, waiting for him to object. He didn't. He just stared at his plate, the silence louder than any insult. Cathy should have walked out that night. She should have stood, lifted her chin, and left La Jolla behind, with whatever dignity she still had. But she didn't. Because she believed Nicholas was different. Because love, naive, foolish, hopeful love, can make even the smartest woman sign away her worth for a future she thinks she's building with someone who truly sees her. At the time, Cathy had a solid career in software engineering. Her apartment in San Diego wasn't flashy, but it was hers. Bought with long hours, debugging sessions, and countless cups of cold coffee, she was financially stable, emotionally grounded, and fiercely independent. Nicholas, by contrast, was born into comfort. Tracy and Andrew, his parents, owned a successful real estate empire. They'd paid for his college education, gifted him a coastal home in La Jolla, and handed him a cushy role in the family company. He was raised in luxury. Cathy never wanted any of that. All she wanted was someone who loved her without condition. From the beginning, the signs were there. Tracy's invasive questions about Cathy's parents, her salary, even her student loans, weren't just curiosity. They were quiet rejections. Andrew barely spoke to her at all, and though they never said it outright, it was clear she wasn't one of them. But Nicholas told her it didn't matter. He told her he loved her, he made her feel chosen, seen, and when he proposed, she said yes, believing his love would eventually melt the frost around his family. Instead, she found herself at that dinner table, blindsided by the prenuptial agreement. "It's just a formality," Tracy insisted, her tone saccharine. "It's to protect Nicholas, not to offend you." But every clause screamed distrust. Nicholas' home would remain his inheritance untouched. If the marriage failed, Cathy would walk away empty-handed. "Still," she signed. Not because she was weak, but because she thought she was strong enough to make it work. Because she believed that love, real love, could weather anything. The first year of marriage was smooth, the second tolerable, but by year 3, the cracks began to show, and this time, Cathy couldn't ignore them. Nicholas changed. Or maybe, she realized, she'd only just begun to see him clearly. He stopped making an effort, stopped listening, stopped looking at her the way he used to. Every time she raised a concern, he'd scoff and say, "You're overreacting," and slowly his voice began to echo Trace's, critical, dismissive, cold. "Do you really want to wear that?" he'd ask. "Maybe it's time to consider Botox," he'd say it with a smirk, like he was doing her a favor. And somehow, in his eyes, she'd gone from partner to accessory. Cathy still worked full-time, still contributed, but none of that seemed to matter. They lived in the house his parents gave them, but it was always his house, his money, his future. She was simply a guest. Temporary. Replaceable. Tracy and Andrew didn't help. They dropped by unannounced, rearranged her furniture, criticized her taste, and treated her as if she was merely borrowing space in their legacy. "You're lucky to have Nicholas," Tracy would say, as if Cathy hadn't built a life of her own before any of them had entered it. But then everything shifted. Out of nowhere, Cathy received a call from a lawyer. Her great-uncle, whom she'd met only a few times, had passed away. He had no children, no close family, and unexpectedly, he had left everything to her. $22 million. When Cathy told Nicholas, his first words weren't, "I'm sorry," or "Are you okay?" They were, "Wait, how much?" Suddenly, the woman who had once been treated like a liability was now the prize. Tracy invited her to lunch. Alone. She smiled across the table and said, "I always knew you were special." Andrew, who had ignored her for 6 years, began sending her real estate articles. He wanted to talk investments. Nicholas changed overnight. Sweet, attentive, talking about dream vacations and business ventures. The same man who once mocked her for hanging curtains now praised her taste in art. And Cathy smiled. She let them toast to her success, let them believe they'd won her over, let them think their approval mattered now. What they didn't know was that Cathy had already contacted her attorney. She had pulled out the very prenuptial agreement they had forced her to sign. Ironclad, smugly one-sided. It protected everything Nicholas had, but none of what Cathy had just inherited. So, one evening, while Nicholas was talking about beachfront condos and Tracy was suggesting matching trust funds for the future grandchildren, Cathy simply slid an envelope across the table. Divorce papers. Inside them was a single line highlighted in bold. Assets gained by either party remain individual property unless otherwise agreed in writing. Nicholas paled. Tracy stammered. Andrew looked like someone had slapped him with a ledger. Cathy stood up, calm and poised. "I never needed your money," she said softly. "I just wanted to be respected." And with that, she walked out, head high, future intact, and fortune fully hers. Cathy didn't storm out. She didn't cry or scream or slam doors. Instead, she smiled. A quiet, knowing smile that cloaked weeks of silent preparation. While Nicholas reveled in what he believed was a perfect marriage revival, Cathy played her part like a seasoned actress. She laughed at his jokes, nodded along to his grand business ideas, and allowed Tracy to loop an arm around her during brunch like they were lifelong friends. Nicholas became ambitious. Too ambitious. He started talking about buying a new vacation home in Napa, then remodeling the La Jolla property, and finally investing in his father's latest real estate venture. One night, with a drink in hand and entitlement in his voice, he said, "It only makes sense to keep wealth within the family." Not once did he ask Cathy what she wanted to do with the money she inherited, because in his eyes, it wasn't really hers. It was a resource. His resource. That was the moment Cathy realized something chilling. Nicholas had never truly loved her. She was a placeholder, a polished accessory to his family's image. Now that she had value, they pretended she mattered. But she saw right through them, and she had a plan. The first move was silent but firm. Cathy opened a private bank account under her own name and transferred her entire inheritance. No shared access, no trail. Next, she hired a lawyer, not for protection but for clarity. Together, they examined every line of the prenuptial agreement, the same one Tracy and Andrew had smugly forced her to sign. And that's when they discovered the oversight that would undo them all. So obsessed were Nicola's parents with shielding their fortune that they'd failed to include a clause protecting Nicola's from Cathy's assets. If the marriage dissolved, Nicola would walk away with nothing, not a single dollar from her $22 million. Cathy nearly laughed. The document meant to trap her was now her greatest weapon. But she didn't rush. She moved strategically. She began separating herself from Nicholas in every invisible way. She gathered tax returns, property documents, account statements. Quietly, she purchased her own beachfront cottage in La Jolla, fully paid for, registered only to her name. All she needed was the final push to walk away. And of course, Nicholas gave it to her. He started coming home later and later. Cathy didn't press. Maybe he was working, maybe he was just putting in extra effort to impress her now that she held the financial reins. But one evening, while he was in the shower, his phone buzzed. A message lit up the screen from someone named Lucy. "I'd like to see you tonight. Last time was amazing." No anger, no heartbreak. Cathy just felt a stillness, the kind of calm that comes when everything finally makes sense. She opened the thread and scrolled. Months of messages, photos, plans. Lucy had been in the picture long before the inheritance, perhaps long before the wedding. Nicholas hadn't just been using her, he was preparing to leave her too, once her worth had been transferred to his world. But he'd misjudged her. Instead of confronting him, Cathy called a private investigator. If Nicholas wanted to play dirty, she would play masterfully. Within a week, she had everything: timestamps, hotel footage, bar receipts, images of Nicholas kissing Lucy, touching her, gazing at her like he hadn't looked at Cathy in years. Perfect. She brought the evidence straight to her lawyer. "Ready?" she asked. Her lawyer smiled. "Let's bring it home." That night, Nicholas came back humming. He kissed her cheek, poured himself a drink, and launched into a monologue about a lucrative investment deal his father wanted him to lead. He was riding high, completely unaware. Cathy listened. Then, without a word, she slid an envelope across the table. Nicholas frowned. "What's this?" "Read it," she replied. He opened the folder, flipping through the pages. His face morphed from puzzled to panicked. "You're joking," he said with a shaky laugh. "He's not," Cathy said, her voice calm as still water. "You know you're not getting anything, right?" he blurted. "I mean, I don't know who your lawyer is, but the prenup." She reached into her bag and pulled out a familiar document, the prenuptial agreement they'd once pushed across a dinner table like a loaded gun. She flipped to a highlighted section. "This clause," she said, tapping the page, "states that you have no claim to any assets I acquired during the marriage. You remember this part, right?" Nicholas' skin turned pale. He flipped back and forth through the pages, hoping, desperately, that some hidden loophole would save him. "You and your parents made sure I'd walk away with nothing," she said, "but you forgot to make sure you'd walk away with something." Silence. No Tracy, no Andrew, no legal cavalry to swoop in and fix things. Just Nicholas, sitting alone in a fortress built by arrogance. And she wasn't done. "Oh, and by the way," Cathy said, her voice still soft. She opened a second envelope and tossed photographs onto the table. Nicholas and Lucy, kissing, embracing, planning their little escape. Nicholas stared, motionless. "I'll inform my lawyer you've seen the evidence," she said, standing up. "We'll be in touch." She grabbed her bag, pocketed her keys, and walked out of the house she never needed to pretend was hers ever again. But the story didn't end there. She didn't hear from Nicholas that night, not the next morning either. But then her phone rang. It wasn't Nicholas. It was Tracy. Her name flashed across the screen, like an echo from a chapter Cathy had already closed. The phone rang once, twice, a third time. Finally, Cathy answered, and before she could say a word, Tracy's voice, tight with disbelief, came through. "How could you do this to Nicholas?" Cathy didn't reply. She didn't need to. Some truths speak loudest in silence. Tracy's voice hissed through the phone like a lit fuse. What do you think you're doing? Leaving him? Divorcing him? Humiliating him like this? You're destroying his life." Cathy let out a soft, almost amused breath. "Are you serious?" Tracy didn't pause. "You're doing this out of spite. For what? Petty revenge? I was honest with you from day one. I made it clear. You were nothing to our family. And now you think you've won?" But Cathy's voice didn't rise. It stayed steady, like the calm before a thunderstorm. "No, Tracy, I'm not ruining Nicholas' life. I'm just letting him face the consequences of the life he chose." There was a pause, sharp and sudden. Then Tracy's voice dropped to a chilling whisper. "You're going to regret this." Cathy stared at the phone as the line went dead. Then she leaned back, closed her eyes, and whispered to herself, "So, that's how they want to play it." What followed were days of eerie quiet. No texts, no calls, no updates. And then her lawyer rang. "They're contesting the prenup." Cathy blinked. "Excuse me?" "They're claiming the agreement is void due to coercion and unfair conditions," her lawyer said. She laughed out loud. "Unfair? They wrote it. They practically shoved it down my throat." But this was no amateur move. Tracy and Andrew were powerful, well-connected, and now desperate. The moment they realized Nicholas was walking away with nothing, they switched from smug to savage. But Cathy had prepared for this long before the storm hit. The court date arrived like the final scene of a play no one expected her to star in. Tracy, Andrew, and Nicholas entered with a legal army. 3 high-price attorneys in expensive suits, all pretending this was just business. Cathy walked in with her lawyer and a forensic accountant. While they were busy trying to dig into her fortune, she had been quietly digging into theirs. And what she found could bring down an empire. Under the table, property deals, tax fraud buried beneath a paper trail, fake accounts, hidden assets. For years, Tracy and Andrew had been doctoring company finances. Nicholas, though blissfully unaware, was listed on executive paperwork. So when their lawyers began confidently arguing that the prenup was predatory, Cathy's lawyer remained unfazed. He leaned forward, opened a thick binder, and calmly slid it across the table. "Before we proceed, Your Honor, we have some material to present for the court's review." Cathy watched Tracy's face lose all color. Andrew sat upright, his lips thinning to a line. Nicholas just looked confused. The judge flipped through the binder. Page after page. Evidence, receipts, account ledgers. Then came the silence. "Mr. and Mrs. Anderson," the judge said slowly, "do you understand the gravity of what I'm seeing here?" Tracy wobbled slightly in her seat. Andrew clenched his jaw. Nicholas looked from the judge to the documents, then back to his parents. "What is this? I don't handle the finances," he stammered. "I didn't know about any of this." He turned to them. "Mom? Dad?" But they didn't look at him. They were both staring at Cathy. Because in that moment, they finally understood she hadn't just walked away. She had brought the whole house down behind her. The courtroom buzzed with shifting energy. The judge's decision came down swiftly. The prenuptial agreement would stand. There would be no loophole, no sympathy. And Cathy, once dismissed, disrespected, and underestimated, had not only protected herself, she'd exposed everything they tried to bury. Cathy's inheritance remained untouched, secured entirely in her name. But while she walked away clean, Tracy and Andrew were now trapped in a storm of their own making. The financial investigation launched by federal authorities was swift and unforgiving. Hidden accounts, forged statements, tax evasion, and at the center of it all, a name that showed up one too many times. Nicholas Anderson. Whether he was fully aware or just blindly complicit didn't matter. On paper, he was part of it, executively listed, financially tied, and now legally exposed. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps give light to voices that deserve to be seen and heard. The Anderson estate, once a pillar of polished prestige, began to crumble. Business assets were frozen, public trust evaporated. The glossy reputation Tracy and Andrew spent decades cultivating was now in ashes. And Cathy? She walked away from it all. Wealthy, untouchable, and finally, free. She could still hear Tracy's last words echoing in her mind like a badly played violin. "You'll regret this." But Cathy only smiled when the memory came. No, she thought, Tracy will. Nicholas tried calling. At first, his voice dripped with rage. "You set me up. You destroyed everything." Then came desperation. "We can fix this. Just talk to me." And finally, one last attempt. Tears, apologies, begging. Cathy let every call go to voicemail. She had nothing more to say. Besides, Tracy and Andrew had bigger problems. The IRS had descended like a storm. Audits, subpoenas, frozen accounts. Their team of lawyers couldn't spin it this time, and the friends they once dined with in gated estates, gone, vanished. Through a mutual acquaintance, Cathy learned they'd been forced to sell their lavish Rancho Santa Fe estate just to cover legal costs. It was a poetic ending. The same house where they once toasted to Cathy's luck at joining their legacy now belonged to no one. And Nicholas, with his parents drowning in scandal, he had nowhere left to go. The La Jolla home, once his house, was seized. Their fortune evaporated. The illusion shattered. Cathy's world, once so tightly tangled with theirs, was now oceans away. Literally. She'd moved into her own home on the coast, a sun-washed property she purchased outright. No husband, no in-laws, no one telling her she was lucky to be included in someone else's life. She had built this chapter herself, and she reveled in it. Then one afternoon her phone rang again, a number she almost didn't recognize, but then she did. Lucy. Nicholas' mistress. Cathy debated ignoring it, but curiosity had a pull. She answered. "You?" Lucy snapped. "You ruined everything." Cathy leaned back in her chair, calm and amused. "I suppose Nicholas didn't tell you the whole story." There was a pause, then bitter laughter on the other end. "He said we'd start fresh, that we'd have money, a new house, a new life. But now, he has nothing. You left him with nothing." Cathy said nothing. She just let her speak, let her rage spiral into silence. Then, quietly, she asked, "And what exactly do you expect me to do about that?" Lucy's voice turned sharp. "He was your husband." Cathy's reply was swift and final. "Not anymore." And with that, she hung up. She didn't think much of Nicholas anymore. Occasionally she'd hear whispers, how he'd moved in with his parents again, this time not in a gated mansion, but in a rented apartment. No luxury, no influence, just a surname tied to scandal. Cathy, on the other hand, woke up each day to the sound of ocean waves and light pouring in through open windows. She had no one dictating her place in the world, no one measuring her worth against theirs. No contracts, no conditions. Just freedom. She had walked away from the ashes of someone else's empire and built a kingdom of her own. Sometimes the most powerful kind of justice doesn't come with noise or applause. It comes quietly, in the form of courage, compassion, and choosing to walk away with dignity. In a world that often measures worth by wealth or status, stories like this remind us that true strength lives in our choices, and kindness is never weakness. Every small act, Every stand taken, every truth spoken, can change not only a life, but a legacy. Thank you for being here with us today. If this story moved you, if it made you think, or simply warmed your heart, we invite you to like, share, and subscribe, not just for the story you heard, but for the countless untold ones still waiting to be seen. And as we always say at Kind Light Stories, even the smallest light can break the darkest silence. We'll see you next time. Until then, stay kind.